Okay, so now we're going to stew tomatoes. These are tomatoes that have been roasted and the skin's removed, and we've crushed them, and with our fingers, just pinching them apart. And so now I'm going to add the puree back to this. This is the pureed skins and some of the juice of all of these tomatoes. Okay. And so we're just going to stir these back in. And if we wanted to can them at this point, we certainly could. Okay, these are our stewed tomatoes, and they've reached the temperature. This is that I want them to cook at to reduce. You can see we've got a fast little simmer going on, and we'll stir it every 15 minutes or so. And again, that depends on the quality of your pan. I actually could come back in half an hour and be perfectly fine with this, but we're going to leave this simmering for about an hour, and we want it to reduce. Is about a half an inch down. When it's about an inch and a half, we'll have it reduce about an inch before we check it again, and then I believe we'll be ready to can this. Okay, this has been simmering pretty heavily for an hour, and as you can see, we've only gone down maybe a half an inch or a quarter of an inch, and I don't think that's quite ready. So I'm going to, and this is a personal preference. If this is enough to satisfy you, then you can go ahead and can this right now. Like I said, we could have canned it before we even started, but I like it a little richer than this, so I think I might even let it cook down another hour. I'm not in a hurry, and I'd rather have it the way I want it than to finish it quickly, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, it's been 2 hours, and you can see it's cooked down quite a bit from the original. It originally was up about right here, and it's cooked down almost an inch. And this is the way I wanted it. It's got a nice red sauce that's a very concentrated flavor, and it's ready to be canned. And we'll can it exactly the way we can the others, and then we'll have plenty of stewed tomatoes to last us for the rest of the year. Okay, so we have roasted 2 sheets of tomatoes, and they are roasted to where the skins are slightly beginning to turn a little bit brown, not very brown, but they're very wrinkled, and that's the degree that we want to cook them. We don't want them to become charred because we want to use these skins. There's so much nutrition and flavor in the skins that there's just no reason not to use it. Most people throw that away because when you cook tomatoes and you leave the skin in, the skin becomes almost like plastic. It's like chewing on plastic. It's very tough. And so normally, like we did before when we're canning tomatoes, we remove the skin, puree it, and put it back into the liquid that with the rest of the tomatoes. In making tomato paste, we are going to puree the whole tomato because we are going to cook that down into a thick paste, and there's no reason for us to leave pieces of tomato in it like you want when you're using canned tomatoes. And so all we're doing is taking out the core and putting these in our blender. And I believe any blender will do. What we're going to do is we're going to cook this down a great deal until it forms a very thick paste. It isn't as thick as commercial tomato paste, but it is much thicker than a tomato sauce. It's more like a thick ketchup. And you can use it interchangeably with commercial tomato paste. However, you may have to use more of it to get the same consistency. My problem with tomato paste is, for one thing, I do not like to eat things that come in a can. And the reason is that there's just so many toxins that we don't know about that they're spraying our cans with. And I just don't like risking it. For another thing, when you're canning your own tomatoes, you know exactly what's going into it. And these tomatoes were picked today. How much fresher can you get than that? And so I like knowing what's in my food supply. So we're going to fill this pan, and we're going to cook it down until what we have is about a half a pan left. We're going to reduce it at least 50%, and if that doesn't seem thick enough, I'll reduce it even further, maybe to where there's only a third of the quantity we began with. And that will give you a wonderful paste that is great when you're making a sauce and you just want to kick up the tomato flavor a little bit without putting such a concentrated paste in it. Another thing is, when you're buying a tomato paste, sometimes the recipe will only call for a tablespoon. And by the time you get back to using the rest of that can, you may as well throw it away because it's been so long. Well, this way you can use a can of your own freshly pureed and concentrated tomato paste, and know what's in it, and know when it was picked and who grew it, and that it has no pesticides in it. And it's just a wonderful way to handle your food. So we are going to now puree some of this. I'm going to use my earplugs because I'm a safety girl. We're going to put it on low. Now I like to puree this to where the seeds are pureed as well. Now a lot of people will throw away the seeds because they say they're bitter. I happen to disagree with that. I never throw away my seeds, and now there's good evidence that these seeds are actually very good for you. And so I just puree them to where you can't see them. I've never experienced bitterness in my sauce because I left the seeds in it. And we're going to transfer this to the pan that we're going to be cooking in. And we'll do another batch, and we'll do that until this pan is relatively full. Okay, so I've pureed the roasted tomatoes after coring them, and they were pureed with their skins on. And I now have a full pot of pureed tomato that we're going to cook down. It's probably a half an inch maybe from the top of the lid, and that's enough. And we're going to cook this as long as it takes to cut the size in at least half, the quantity at least by half. And I'm going to transfer this to the stove now. Okay, so you can see this is, I've transferred this to the stove, and we are have brought it to a boil. And so I'm going to turn this down a little now and stir it and make sure that nothing is sticking on the bottom. And it's doing quite well. So we are going to cook this as at high a temperature as we can cook it without scorching it. And that is entirely dependent on the kind of pan you're using. This pan is a very high quality pan with several layers of different kinds of metals on the bottom, and this pan doesn't tend to scorch. But I have had pans that if I didn't stir it every 5 minutes or so, it would scorch terribly, ruining the entire batch. So it's very important that you get to know your cookware, and that you pay attention to your tomatoes. But keep an eye on it, keep stirring it whenever you can. Do not let it scorch, because if you scorch it, it is ruined. You have to keep an eye on this. Now this is how much we have in here, and what we're looking for is about this much, and even maybe less than that. So This is going to take several hours, and so we just need to be patient and keep an eye on it. This is the kind of dish you want to make when you have to stay home and do laundry and have nothing better to do. Okay, we'll be back. Okay, we're back. It's been about an hour, and I have been stirring this every 15 or 20 minutes. And it's, you can see it's moving at quite a little pace. It's simmering at a pretty fast simmer. And I have stirred it, nothing sticking to the bottom. And I should caution you that the thicker this gets, the more likely it is to scorch. So in the beginning, you may not have to stir it as much as you will towards the end of this process. It's doing quite well. It's reduced about an inch so far, and you can see it's still pretty soupy. So we've got quite a long way to go, and so we'll continue doing what we're doing, and we'll be back to check on this in an hour or so. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours, and this just dropped down almost 2 inches. And so we'll just continue cooking until it becomes as thick as we want it. You can see, I've been stirring it, you can see it's starting to take on some texture. But it's nowhere near where we want it to be at this point. Okay, we're back, and it has been a long day, but look at what we have. This is just the way we want it. This is just the thickness that we want this, what I call a tomato paste, which really isn't a paste. It's more like a very, very, very thick sauce. And this is the consistency that we use. And so it's been 7 hours, and this is finished. So now we'll can it and put it away, and we will have this for many, many very delicious meals in the coming year. And that is perfect. And if you make a little pile, it will stay there. And so that's how I know that this is the right consistency. Okay, I'm going to turn this off, and we will can this, and then we're done. Okay, we're back. We're using 4-ounce jars, and it's very easy to overfill them. That's about as full as we want it. It should come about to this lip. I've got it slightly over, but that's okay. And we're going to do a lot of these because not only does it hold more in the on the rack in the canner, but you can also double stack them, so you can do quite a few of these at one time. Okay, so we've filled 26 jars, and the reason I've filled this many at one time is because we've determined that our canning tray will hold 13 jars, and we're going to stack them inside because there's plenty of room for 2, and it's perfectly fine to stack them. I want to mention that this has cooled down, but it's still quite warm. It's not hot enough to break our jars, but it's warm enough to warm them. So we're not putting cold jars into a hot bath. And so we are going to be using a 1/16 of a teaspoon of citric acid per 4-ounce container. And we just have to kind of guess that because I don't have a teaspoon that's that small. And I'm going to do them all at one time. That way I can see that there's citric acid on top. And I won't make the mistake of missing one. If you think that you've missed one of your jars, and I've done that, just taste it. It's very clear whether there's citric acid in it or not. Okay, now I want to show you another jar that I'm going to do. This is an 8-ounce jar. Little spoon until I get the amount that I want. Okay, so the canning jar will hold 8 of these, which means we can put 16 in at one time. it's useful to have both the 4 ounce and the 8 ounce because different recipes will call for different amounts, different quantities. So, and in that one, we will use 1/8 of a teaspoon. Okay. And so now we'll stir these up. This is a non-reactive stainless steel spoon. So it's important to wipe the lids, wipe the lips of this, the edges and the sides, so that you'll get a proper seal. And this is a damp cloth I had ready. So I'm going to do those first. And I've got some lids that I have washed very well in soapy water. And you just hand tighten. You don't have to tighten the dickens out of them. Just tighten them enough to where they'll have a nice seal. So I'm going to finish these that I have out here, and then we'll go to the canner. Okay, so we have 26 that will fit into this, and we're going to drop it down. And it's covered with about 2 inches of water, which is perfect. And this bubbling is perfectly normal. This is air escaping from the jars, and that's what we want it to do so that it'll seal properly. And we are going to now cover this and come back in 40 minutes when they'll be finished. Okay, it's been 40 minutes. And we're going to pull this out of the water bath. And now we're going to just transfer it to a clean cloth. I don't know that you necessarily have to put it on a cloth, but on a heat-proof surface. And let this cool. And as it cools, it will seal. When you can hear it pop, that's when you know the cans have sealed. See, this is down, this is still up. And so this one has sealed and this one has not yet. But they all will as they cool off. Did you hear that one pop? Now, if for some reason it doesn't seal, then you cannot use it. You can't use it as is. You have to put a new lid on it and reprocess it. So one of the things I want to point out is these lids will often be loose. This is sealed, and so actually you don't have to keep the lid. But I always do. But if you're going to tighten them, barely tighten them. Don't tighten them tight because you're likely to disturb the seal. Okay, that's how we do it. Okay, we're back. To sum it up, we have created all of the canned tomatoes that we need for the year. This is just a sample of what we've actually put into storage in our basement downstairs. I do want to point out that I like to put them in the original containers that these jars came in because it makes it very easy to stack on my shelves. You have to do whatever fits your space best, but I find this very useful. So we have our crushed tomatoes that were roasted and crushed and then canned. We have our roasted stewed tomatoes that were roasted and crushed and then cooked down for about an hour or two. And then we have our tomato paste. We have it in a 4-ounce size. And we have it in the 8-ounce size. So these are very convenient to have on hand. And I've done a larger size of our stewed tomatoes, which is 1.5 pints, and that's also very useful. Although I do use the pint sizes more. One more thing I want to mention is that next year you can take these jars and sterilize them and reuse them. You cannot, however, reuse this lid. Once these have been opened, you cannot use them to reseal. So you should discard them once you've finished using them. But these can be reused. Just make sure there's no rust in them. Sometimes a little water gets trapped under the rim and they'll rust a little bit. And it's better to just discard those as well. It is important to date your jars so that you don't confuse them with, if you have a few left over from the year before, you want to use those first. But I date all of mine. These I did in July the 29th, and these I did on August 21st, so I know which ones to use first. But mainly it's to separate them from the ones that you did the year before. Okay, so there you have it. Now you know how to can roasted tomatoes. I'm Danielle Bassoni, serving up whole foods for whole health.